To understand what happened on the morning of the incident, you first need to understand what the night before looked like, because there was nothing unusual about it, nothing that should have set the stage for what was to come. I had spent the prior workday programming a customer machine. It was a task that required focus, patience, and a good deal of technical knowledge. I had given it all three. The work was done. The machine had been set up to the best of my ability, and by the time I clocked out and headed home, I felt that particular kind of quiet satisfaction that comes with a job you know you did well. There is something about working with your hands and your mind at the same time, about programming systems, about the precision required, that leaves you tired in a good way, a full body tired, the kind of tiredness that makes sleep come easy and come deep. My wife and I had a normal evening, dinner, some conversation, the usual rhythms of a household winding down. We went to bed at a reasonable hour. There was no alarm set for some unreasonable time. There was no expectation that the next morning would be anything other than ordinary. We went to sleep. That is the important part. We went to sleep expecting to wake up the way any reasonable adult expects to wake up, on their own terms, at a reasonable hour, or when their alarm told them to. What we got instead was something different entirely. Chapter 2. 5:50 in the morning. Let me paint the picture for you precisely, because precision matters here. The time was 5:50 a.m. I want you to sit with that for a moment. 5:50 in the morning. The sun was barely, if at all, beginning to consider rising, depending on the time of year. The world outside was dark and quiet. Most decent, hardworking people were still deep in sleep. The birds were only just beginning their first uncertain notes. At 5:50 a.m., my phone rang. I was in the bathroom, a natural place to be at any hour, but particularly one where you are in no position to immediately leap to a ringing phone. I did not answer. I could not answer. This is not negligence. This is not avoidance. This is being a human being with biological needs. At nearly 6 in the morning, who is doing what human beings do? The call went unanswered. For most callers, for any caller with even a basic grasp of social norms, an unanswered call at 5:50 a.m. would prompt one of two responses: leave a voicemail, or call back at a reasonable hour, perhaps 7 a.m., perhaps 8 a.m., perhaps, if truly urgent in a workplace context, 6:30 a.m. But that is not what happened. Chapter 3. 5:55 in the morning. 5 minutes later, just 5 minutes, my boss called my wife. I cannot overstate the significance of that decision. That was a deliberate choice. He had my number. He had called it. He knew the call was unanswered. He chose, in that moment, to reach out to my wife. My wife, who had nothing to do with the job. My wife, who was asleep. My wife, who was, by every standard of normal human expectation, entitled to be sleeping at 5:55 in the morning on a weekday. Her phone rang. Imagine that. Imagine being shaken out of sleep by a ringing phone at 5:55 a.m. Imagine the spike of adrenaline, the confusion, the immediate dread that comes with a phone call at that hour. Because here is something that most people understand intuitively, even if they have never consciously articulated it. Phone calls at that hour are not normal. They are not, hey, I need to talk to your husband about a machine. They carry weight. They carry fear. My wife answered. Chapter 4. What she experienced. My wife told me later what that call was like for her, and I want to relay it faithfully because I was not there. I was in the bathroom. I did not experience what she experienced. She did. She told me that when she answered and heard my boss's voice, her first thought, her immediate, gut-punch thought, was that something had happened to me. She told me she was super freaked out. Those are her words and I am keeping them, because they are honest and they are accurate and they deserve to be taken at face value. She did not know, in that moment of panic, whether I was even home. She did not know if I had gotten up early and left for some reason. She did not know if there had been an accident. She did not know if the call was to tell her that something terrible had happened to her husband. She was alone with that fear, with that confusion, for however many seconds or minutes it took to understand that her husband's boss was calling at 5:55 a.m. not to report a tragedy, but to locate an employee over a machine that was, as it turned out, working just fine. Let that settle in. My wife was frightened, genuinely frightened, not annoyed, not mildly inconvenienced. Frightened. There is a difference, and it is not a small one. Part 2. The reality of the situation. Chapter 5. The actual problem. Let me now address the nature of the crisis that prompted this 5:50 a.m. phone call cascade. The machine I had been programming the day prior was, according to the person who called, not working. I rushed in. I want to note that word, rushed. I got up, got ready, and went in, not leisurely, not at my own pace, but rushed. Because the call had communicated urgency. Because I was led to believe that something significant was wrong. Because that is what a responsible employee does when they believe there is a genuine crisis. When I arrived, the machine was working. Let me say that again so it has the space it deserves. The machine was working. Yes, there had been some downtime on the third shift. That is real, and I do not dismiss it. Downtime has costs. Downtime is a problem worth solving. I understand that. But the machine I had been pulled out of bed, and whose existence had caused my wife to be frightened at nearly 6 in the morning, was operational when I arrived. It was not a matter of life or death. It was not a catastrophic, irreversible failure. It was not an emergency in any meaningful sense of the word. It was a temporary issue that had, by the time I was physically present, resolved itself. And for this, my wife was woken up at 5:55 a.m. in a panic. Chapter 6. The question of urgency. Let us talk about urgency. Let us talk about what actually constitutes an emergency that justifies a phone call at 5:50 in the morning. Someone is injured. Someone is in danger. The building is on fire. A critical system failure threatens irreversible harm to people or property. These are emergencies. These are the situations that justify reaching out at any hour, through any means necessary, to the people who need to know. A machine that may or may not be having issues, that a technician will arrive to address at the start of a normal workday. That is not an emergency. That is a problem. Problems have solutions. Solutions follow workday hours unless the problem is truly catastrophic. A few hours of third shift downtime, while inconvenient and worth addressing, does not rise to the level of wake a man's wife before 6 a.m. and terrify her. There is a threshold. That threshold exists for a reason. We have, as a civilization, largely agreed on it. Unless it is life or death, unless it is truly irreversible, unless it truly cannot wait, you do not call people before 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. You do not call their spouses at all, unless you have been explicitly given that contact as an emergency contact and this is a situation that qualifies as an emergency. Neither condition was met that morning. Chapter 7. The boundary that was crossed. I want to name the boundary clearly, because I think it sometimes helps to see something stated plainly. My home is not an extension of the workplace. My wife is not an extension of the workplace. My sleeping hours are not the property of my employer, and my wife's peace of mind, her ability to sleep through the night and wake up without terror, is not something that can be casually sacrificed for operational convenience. When my boss called my wife at 5:55 a.m., he crossed several lines simultaneously. He invaded my personal life. He involved a third party, my wife, who had no role in the situation and who did not consent to being part of it. He did so at an hour that virtually everyone in this culture recognizes as reserved for sleeping, unless circumstances are dire. And he did so over a problem that was not dire. These are not subtle violations. They are clear, recognizable, and, I think if he is honest with himself, he knows it. Part 3. The email. Chapter 8. Why I said something. After I arrived at work and confirmed that the machine was, in fact, operational, I sent an email. I want to address, preemptively, the potential criticism that I should have just let it go, that I was being too sensitive, that this was just a misunderstanding, that in the grand sweep of things this was not a big deal. I have considered these objections. I reject them. The reason I said something is simple. If I do not, it will happen again. Not necessarily to my wife, but to someone, because behavior that is not addressed is behavior that continues. If my boss walked away from that morning believing it was an acceptable way to reach an employee, the next incident is just a matter of time. I also said something because my wife deserved to have someone stand up and say, on her behalf, that what happened to her was wrong. She did not choose to be part of this. She was made a part of it. The least I could do was make clear that her experience mattered and that the person who caused it should acknowledge it. And I said something because I believe in honesty and directness. I think most workplace problems fester because no one wants to have the uncomfortable conversation. I was willing to have it, in writing, no less, so there would be a record. Chapter 9. What I said. In the email, I called out the behavior and used the word unacceptable. I stand by that word, because it is accurate. The behavior was unacceptable, not terrible in a human sense. My boss is not a villain. He is a person who made a poor judgment call in a pressured moment. but the call itself was unacceptable by the standards of professional and personal conduct. I also demanded, and yes, I used that word deliberately, an apology to my wife, not to me. Not a general acknowledgement that things could have been handled differently. A direct apology to my wife, who was the one who was frightened, who was the one woken up before 6 a.m. by a voice she did not expect, conveying a situation that triggered real fear. She is the one who deserves to hear the words. I want to pause here and acknowledge that the word demanded can sound aggressive. I understand that, but I think there are moments when demanding something is the correct move, when the situation is clear enough, and the wrong significant enough, that asking nicely suggests the wrong is open to negotiation. It is not. An apology to my wife is not a debatable point. It is the right thing to do. Chapter 10. What happens when you don't speak up? I have worked long enough to know what happens when employees absorb things in silence. They grow resentful. The workplace relationship deteriorates in invisible ways. Small slights accumulate. What could have been resolved with one honest conversation becomes an undercurrent of tension that affects everything. I do not want that. I want a good working relationship. I want to show up, do my job well, and feel respected doing it. I also want to go home at the end of the day knowing that my home is my home, that the people I love are not going to be pulled into the orbit of my workplace in ways they did not sign up for. The email was not an attack. It was a correction. A signal that a line had been crossed and an invitation to make it right. That is, in the healthiest possible interpretation, what accountability in a workplace looks like. Part 4. On Decency and Common Sense. Chapter 11. The 7 a.m. Rule. I mentioned to my boss, and I will reiterate here, that my understanding is that common decency, not law, not policy, but basic human decency, suggests you do not call someone before 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. unless it is a matter of life or death. I want to expand on why I believe this. Sleep is not a luxury. Sleep is a biological necessity. We have known this for a long time, and in recent years the scientific literature on the importance of sleep has become so overwhelming that it is virtually impossible to argue with. Adults need somewhere between 7 and 9 hours of sleep per night to function properly, cognitively, physically, emotionally. Disrupted sleep has measurable effects on health, mood, judgment, and performance. When you call someone at 5:50 a.m., you are very likely disrupting that sleep. You are reaching into their biological need and interrupting it. This is not a neutral act. It has consequences for the person you are calling, and for the people they live with. When you then call that person's spouse 5 minutes later, you are compounding that disruption. You are spreading it. You are saying, in effect, that the operational needs of the workplace at this hour are more important than the biological and emotional needs of two people who are sleeping in their own home. That is a significant claim. It should require a significant justification. The machine might not be working is not that justification. Chapter 12. What common sense looks like here. Common sense, in this situation, would have looked something like this. You discover, possibly late in the night shift or very early in the morning, that the machine appears to not be working correctly. You or the shift supervisor note this. You consider your options. You think, is this a matter of life or death? No. Is this irreversible if we wait 2 hours? Probably not. Can the shift manage around it or document the issue until the appropriate person can be reached at a reasonable hour? Yes. You wait until 7 a.m. or 7:30 a.m. You call the employee directly. You leave a voicemail if they do not answer. You wait a few minutes. You call again. You absolutely, under no circumstances, call their spouse at 5:55 a.m. after a single unanswered call. This is not complicated. This is not asking for extraordinary consideration. This is the baseline of how you treat people. The fact that it did not play out this way is not because my boss is a terrible person. It is because, in the pressure of the moment, he made a poor decision. Poor decisions can be acknowledged. Acknowledged decisions can be apologized for. Apologized situations can be moved past. That is the road I am trying to point toward. Chapter 13. The culture of constant availability. I want to take a moment to address something broader, because I think the incident did not happen in a vacuum. It happened in a culture, a workplace culture, and frankly a broader societal culture, that has increasingly blurred the line between work time and personal time. Smartphones changed everything. When people carry their work email, their work contacts, and their work communications in their pocket at all times, there is a temptation, sometimes subtle, sometimes explicit, to treat that as an invitation to reach them at all times. It is not. The fact that technology makes it possible to contact someone at 5:50 a.m. does not make it appropriate to do so. The fact that an employee's personal phone number is available does not mean that number carries unlimited permission to use it, and the fact that a spouse's number can be found or is known does not mean that number is ever appropriate to use for non-emergency workplace purposes. We need, as a society, to hold the line on this, and I believe one way we hold that line is by naming it when it is crossed. Not aggressively, not vindicatively, but clearly. This is me holding the line. Chapter 14. The spouse was not part of this. Let me dedicate a chapter specifically to this point, because I feel it is sometimes underemphasized in conversations like this one. My wife did not take this job. I did. My wife did not agree to be part of any on-call arrangement, explicit or implicit. She did not sign any paperwork. She did not receive any compensation. She made no agreement whatsoever to be available to my employer at any hour for any reason. She is a private person. Her phone number, whatever my boss knew of it, was not shared with him for professional use. Certainly not for 5:55 a.m. operational check-ins. When he called her that morning, he reached into her life without her consent. He caused her genuine alarm, and he did so for a reason that was not sufficient to justify the cost she paid. In fear, in lost sleep, in the disorienting experience of waking to an unexpected call before the sun was up. She deserves an apology for that. Not a vague one. Not a sorry if you were bothered. A genuine acknowledgement that what happened was wrong, that she was affected by it, and that it will not happen again. Part 5. What an apology means. Chapter 15. Why apologies matter in the workplace. There is a temptation, particularly in professional environments, to view apologies as admissions of weakness or liability. Some managers avoid them entirely for this reason, operating under the misguided assumption that acknowledging a mistake makes them look bad. The opposite is true. An apology, sincerely offered and genuinely meant, is a sign of strength. It requires self-awareness. It requires the ability to put yourself in another person's shoes and recognize that your actions caused them harm. It requires the courage to say so out loud. Leaders who can apologize are leaders who earn trust. And trust, real, durable, professional trust, is the foundation of any functional team. A manager who cannot apologize for a clear mistake does not become more authoritative in my eyes. He becomes less trustworthy, because I know, if he cannot acknowledge this, that if something bigger happens, I cannot count on accountability then either. The apology is not just about my wife, though it is certainly about her. It is about what kind of workplace this is going to be, about what kind of relationship this is going to be, about whether we can move past this and work together with the foundation repaired, or whether this becomes one of those things that just sits there, unaddressed, quietly shaping everything that comes after. Chapter 16. What a real apology looks like. Not all apologies are created equal. I have been alive long enough to know the difference between an apology that means something and one that is designed to end a conversation without actually resolving it. A real apology does not contain the word if. I'm sorry if you were upset is not an apology. It conditions the acknowledgement of harm on whether the person chooses to be upset, which shifts the burden onto them. It is a way of apologizing without actually accepting responsibility. A real apology does not contain the word but. I'm sorry, but I was under a lot of pressure is not an apology. It is an apology followed immediately by a retraction. Context can be shared. It is often valuable, but it belongs after the apology, not tethered to it as a mitigating clause. A real apology names what happened. It says, I called your wife at 5:55 in the morning. I know that must have been startling and frightening. I should not have done that, and I am sorry. It is not long. It does not need to be. It needs to be true. And it needs to be directed at the right person, at my wife, who experienced the actual harm. Chapter 17. What happens after? I want to be clear about what I am and am not asking for beyond the apology. I am not asking for anyone to be disciplined beyond this conversation. I am not asking for policy changes, though I believe clearer expectations around contact hours would benefit everyone. I am not asking for compensation or time off or any material remedy. I am not asking to rehash this in every meeting going forward. I am asking for an apology to my wife, and then I am asking for us to move on. I am fully prepared to move on. I have no desire to hold this over anyone's head. I have no interest in making this workplace uncomfortable or adversarial. I like my job. I am good at what I do. I want to continue being good at what I do in an environment where mutual respect is the norm, not the exception. The apology is the reset. It is the thing that allows us to close this chapter and open the next one cleanly. Without it, the chapter stays open. And open chapters have a way of coloring everything around them. Part 6. The broader principle. Chapter 18. Employees are people, not assets. I want to use this space to say something that I think needs to be said more often in workplaces, and said plainly. Employees are people, not assets, not resources, not units of productivity. People. People with spouses and children and health and needs and lives that extend well beyond the hours they spend at work. This is not a radical statement. It is not a political statement. It is simply true. And yet workplace culture, particularly in certain industries, can develop an implicit set of expectations that treat employee time and employee life as fundamentally belonging to the organization. I push back on that. I push back on it with every year I have been in the workforce and every experience I have had that reminded me, sometimes gently, sometimes abruptly, that the work matters, but the people doing it matter more. When my boss called my wife at 5:55 a.m., he was, whether he intended to or not, acting on an assumption that the needs of the workplace in that moment outweighed the needs of my family. He was wrong. The machine was not dying. The company was not collapsing. The third shift had inconvenient downtime, and that is real. But it did not justify reaching into my home before the sun was up. Chapter 19. What this says about expectations. Every action in a workplace sends a signal. Every decision about what is acceptable sets a precedent. When managers call employees at 5:50 a.m. and get no pushback, the implicit message is that this is normal, that it is okay, that the next time something goes sideways at any hour, the same call can be made. I am offering pushback. Measured, reasoned, documented pushback. My pushback says, this is not normal, and I am not willing to normalize it. It says, my home has boundaries, and those boundaries begin at the end of the workday and do not dissolve until a reasonable hour in the morning. It says, my wife is off limits for work calls, period, unless I have explicitly provided her contact as an emergency contact and a genuine emergency exists. This is not unreasonable. This is not precious. This is not the behavior of a difficult employee. It is the behavior of someone who knows his own worth and the worth of his family, and who is willing to say so clearly. Chapter 20. Work-life balance is not a perk. The phrase work-life balance has been bandied about so frequently that it has started to feel like a corporate buzzword, something printed in employee handbooks and forgotten immediately after. I want to reclaim it, at least for the purposes of this document, and give it its actual meaning. Work-life balance is not a perk that employees negotiate for. It is not a benefit to be offered or withheld. It is a basic right of being a human being who works. The work is part of your life. It is not the whole of it, and the parts that are not work, the sleeping, the eating, the loving, the living, are not available for workplace colonization. What happened at 5:50 a.m. was workplace colonization. It was the job reaching into the non-work hours of my life and the life of someone who does not even work there, and extracting something, peace, sleep, calm, that was never the job's to take. I am naming it that clearly so that the magnitude of it is understood. Chapter 21. On pressure and poor decisions. I want to say something charitable, because I think it is true and because I think it matters. People in management positions often operate under significant pressure. They are responsible not just for their own performance but for the performance of everyone they oversee. When something goes wrong, when a machine is down, when production is affected, when a customer is unhappy, the pressure falls on them. I understand that. I have sympathy for it. I know that the call at 5:50 a.m. was probably not made from a place of malice. It was made from a place of pressure, of urgency, of wanting to solve the problem as quickly as possible. But good judgment is not just about intentions. It is about outcomes. And the outcome of that decision was that my wife was frightened out of sleep before 6 a.m. The intention, getting a machine fixed, does not erase that outcome. It provides context for it, but context is not absolution. The way forward from a pressure-driven poor decision is to acknowledge it, to say, I was stressed, I acted hastily, I did not think through what it would mean for your wife to receive that call, and I am sorry. That is honest, that is human, that is the kind of thing that, when said genuinely, actually makes things better. Part 7. Thinking it through. Chapter 22. The decision tree. That morning let me walk through the decision tree that existed at 5:50 a.m. because I think it is instructive to map out the choices that were available. Option 1. Wait until 7 a.m. or 7:30 a.m. Call me at that hour. If I do not answer, Leave a voicemail and wait. This is the option that costs the least to the most people. The machine has some additional downtime, which is unfortunate. But no one is woken before sunrise. No wife is frightened. No boundary is crossed. Option 2. Call me at 5:50 a.m. If I don't answer, leave a voicemail. Wait a few minutes. Call again. If no answer, make an internal decision about how to proceed. Pull in another qualified person. Document the issue. Wait for normal hours. This option is more aggressive, but it at least respects the implicit boundary that an employee's spouse is not an appropriate emergency relay. Option 3. Call me at 5:50 a.m. When I don't answer within 5 minutes, call my wife. This is the option that was chosen, and it is the worst option on the list. The one that intrudes most deeply, that involves the most people, that causes the most alarm. For a situation that did not require any of it, the question I keep coming back to is, why was option 3 the choice? What, in the decision-making that morning, made calling my wife seem like the appropriate next step after one unanswered phone call? I genuinely do not know, but I know that if the question had been asked out loud, should I call his wife? Any reasonable person in that room would have said no. Chapter 23. The 5-minute gap. I want to linger on something specific. The fact that it was only 5 minutes between the call to me and the call to my wife. 5 minutes. 300 seconds. Not long enough for me to call back. Not long enough to leave and wait for a reasonable response. Barely long enough to register that the first call had gone unanswered. 5 minutes is the gap between I couldn't get to the phone and I am deliberately ignoring you. It is nowhere near long enough to establish the latter. Most people, at 5:50 in the morning, would need at least a few minutes to even realize their phone was ringing, to come out of sleep, register the sound, understand what it is, find the phone. 5 minutes is nothing, and yet in those 5 minutes, the decision was made to escalate to my wife. That escalation, made that quickly, speaks to a level of urgency that the actual situation did not support, and it had consequences that, I think, were not considered at all. Chapter 24. What it felt like to come home after. I want to talk about what it was like to come home that evening, after the rush to work, after confirming the machine was fine, after sending the email, after all of it. My wife and I talked about what had happened. She told me how she had felt. She is not a fragile person. She is capable and strong and not prone to dramatics. When she described being super freaked out, I know what that means. That is not hyperbole. That is genuine, real-time fear. She had not known, in those first seconds of hearing my boss's voice before 6 a.m., whether something had happened to me. She had not known if I was in the house. She had not known if this was the call you never want to get. She found out it was a machine that was working by the time I got there. There is something deeply frustrating about that, not just because the call was inappropriate, but because the thing that justified it, the urgency, the crisis, turned out to be as non-urgent as it could have been. My wife paid an emotional price for nothing. She was frightened for nothing. She was robbed of the peace of her morning for a machine that did not need her husband in the way her husband was summoned. She deserves an apology for that. It is the minimum. Chapter 25. A note on what demanding means. I said in my email that I demanded an apology. I want to address that word one more time. Demanding is not the same as being aggressive. It is not the same as being unreasonable. In this context, it is simply a statement that the apology is not optional, that it is not something I will accept not happening. It is the appropriate word for a situation where the right course of action is clear and I am unwilling to pretend it is ambiguous. I am not demanding a written essay. I am not demanding public humiliation. I am not demanding anything that costs more than a moment of honesty and the willingness to say, I was wrong, and I am sorry. That is a very small demand. It is a demand that is fully within the power of the person being asked to fulfill, and it is a demand that is in everyone's interest to fulfill, because an apology delivered genuinely makes things better for everyone in the room. Part 8. Moving forward. Chapter 26. I do not want this to define us. Let me be direct about something. Again, I do not want this incident to define my relationship with my boss or with this workplace. I have not written this document as a declaration of war. I have not written it to build a case that will follow anyone around for years. I have written it to be heard, completely, thoroughly, without any ambiguity about what I experienced and what I am asking for. Once I am heard, and once an apology has been offered to my wife, I am ready to move on, completely and genuinely. I do not carry grudges well. They are heavy and they slow you down and they ultimately hurt the person carrying them more than the person they are directed at. I have no interest in carrying this one. What I need in order to move on is simple: the acknowledgement, the apology, the assurance, even if implicit, that it will not happen again, and then we can both walk out of this moment and back into a functional, professional, respectful working relationship. I genuinely believe that is possible. I would not have written any of this if I did not believe it was possible. Chapter 27. What respect looks like going forward. I would ask for a few things that I believe are already implicit in any reasonable workplace relationship, but that I now want to make explicit. First, calls to me before 7 a.m. should be reserved for situations that genuinely cannot wait until 7 a.m. I trust that in the vast majority of cases, we will never need to have that conversation, because the vast majority of workplace problems, even urgent feeling ones, can wait 2 hours. Second, my wife's contact information is not a backup resource for reaching me. If I am unreachable, the correct next step is to leave a message and wait, or to handle the situation with available resources. There is no scenario short of a genuine emergency that justifies calling my spouse. Third, I would ask for the same level of respect and consideration I give to my work and to my team every day. I show up. I do the job. I care about the outcome. I want to feel that care is mutual, that the people I work for see me as a person whose home and family are worth respecting. These are not difficult requests. They are the baseline of a healthy, functional professional relationship. Chapter 28. A word about my wife. My wife does not know I am writing this. She knows I sent an email. She knows I pushed back. She supported me in doing so, but she did not ask me to write 50 pages. She is not the kind of person who would ask for that. She is the kind of person who would say it is fine, that it is over, that I should not make a big deal of it. I am making a big deal of it because someone should, because she is worth making a big deal of it for, because the people we love deserve to have their fear taken seriously, and their peace protected, and their mornings not invaded by work crises that aren't crises. She is, as far as I am concerned, owed an apology, and the person who caused the fear is capable of offering one. So that is what I am asking for. Chapter 29. On being told I am crazy, I anticipate, because this is the kind of thing that happens when you push back in a workplace, that someone, somewhere, might suggest that I am overreacting, that I am being too sensitive, that I am making too big a deal of this. I want to address that preemptively. I am not crazy. I am not overreacting. I am not being too sensitive. I am a person who had a clear, identifiable, specific thing happen to his family, who has articulated clearly and calmly why it was wrong and what should be done about it. That is not sensitivity. That is self-respect. The instinct to call people who push back oversensitive is a way of avoiding accountability. It moves the conversation away from what happened and toward whether the person raising the concern is reliable enough to be taken seriously. It is deflection. I am serious. I am reliable. And I am raising a concern that any reasonable person, presented with the facts, would agree is legitimate. At 5:55 a.m., you do not call someone's wife after a single unanswered call, over a machine that turned out to be working. That is not a controversial position. It is common sense. Part 9. The bigger picture. Chapter 30. On workplace culture and accountability. I want to spend some time in this section thinking about the larger context in which this incident occurred, because I believe individual incidents rarely happen in isolation. They happen within cultures, within patterns, within sets of expectations that have, over time, become normalized. In many workplaces, particularly in industries that deal with machinery, production, and shift work, there is a culture of urgency that can become its own kind of distortion. Everything feels like a crisis because the machinery of production is always running, always demanding, always generating problems that need solutions. The pressure is real. The stakes feel high even when they are not. In that culture, calling someone at 5:50 a.m. might feel normal, might even feel necessary, because the culture has trained the person making the call to respond to operational problems with maximum urgency at all times. But cultures can be wrong, and one of the things that corrects them is people saying, "This is not okay. This crosses a line." The urgency of the moment does not override the basic rights and dignity of the people doing the work. I am saying that. Chapter 31. What I hope comes of this. Beyond the apology to my wife, which is the primary and non-negotiable ask, I hope this document starts a conversation, not a formal, HR-mediated, company-wide conversation necessarily, but a conversation between two people who work together about what reasonable expectations look like. I hope it prompts a reflection on when calling outside of work hours is truly appropriate. I hope it makes the next time a phone starts to be dialed at 5:50 a.m. a moment of pause, a moment of, wait, is this actually necessary? Before the call is placed. I hope it communicates to my boss that I am the kind of employee who will always say something when something is wrong, not to be difficult, not to create drama, but because I believe honesty and directness are how functional relationships work, and I would rather have the uncomfortable conversation than let something fester. And I hope it communicates to my wife, if she ever reads this, and she may, that I took what happened to her seriously, that I did not shrug it off, that I used every tool I had to make sure the right thing happened. Chapter 32. A final thought on what makes a good boss. I have had bosses in my career who I would describe as genuinely good, not just effective or productive or results-oriented, but good. The kind of good that means they understood something about the people who worked for them beyond their job titles and skill sets. They knew that their employees were human beings. They treated them accordingly. What makes a boss good, in my experience, is not the absence of demanding moments or high expectations. Good bosses can be demanding. They can have high standards. They can push people. That is not the issue. What makes a boss good is knowing where the line is, knowing when to push and when to pull back, knowing that there is a home on the other side of the workday that deserves to be respected, and knowing, this is the most important part, that when they get it wrong, they can say so, that they can look at someone and say, I crossed a line, and I am sorry for that. I believe my boss has the capacity to be that kind of boss. I am giving him the opportunity to demonstrate it. Part 10. Conclusion. Chapter 33. The simple version. I have written a great deal. I have explored this from many angles. I have tried to be thorough, not because the situation is complicated, but because I wanted it to be understood completely. But if you are the person this document is ultimately intended for, my boss, and you are wondering what the simple version is, here it is. At 5:55 a.m., you called my wife. She was asleep. She was frightened by the call. She did not know if I was safe. The reason for the call was a machine that turned out to be working. Calling my wife before 6 a.m., in those circumstances, was not okay. I am asking you to call her and say that. To say, I should not have called you at that hour. I am sorry for frightening you. That is it. That is the whole ask. Chapter 34. Why I am not crazy. One more time. For the record, I am not crazy. The social contract around phone calls and appropriate hours exists for a reason. It reflects a shared understanding that people's personal time, and especially their nighttime hours, are not available to the world at large. That boundary applies to employers, to colleagues, and to bosses. When that boundary is crossed, and when the crossing causes someone to experience genuine fear, the right response is to acknowledge it and apologize, not to dismiss the concern, not to rationalize it away, not to wait and hope the employee drops it. I will not drop it, but I also will not make it harder than it needs to be. An apology to my wife makes this simple. Without it, it stays complicated, and complicated things have a way of becoming more complicated. I am choosing the simple path. I am asking you to choose it with me. Chapter 35. In closing, I am a person who shows up to work, who does the job, who takes pride in programming machines correctly the first time, and who, when something goes wrong, rushes in to make it right. I was that person the morning this happened. I will continue to be that person. All I am asking for, in return, is that the person who leads me at work sees me, and the person I go home to every night, as worth a moment of genuine accountability. That is not too much to ask. An apology is owed. I believe it will be given. And when it is, we will move on, written with honesty, and with the hope that we come out the other side of this better than we went in.